Hey guys, welcome. Today in book club, we're doing chapter 9, and it is all about these dialogues for, oh, what does he call it? Dialogues for, towards understanding. Dialogues towards understanding. I think of this chapter a lot as how to express repressed emotions, especially things like anger, guilt, shame, and we'll go through all that. So welcome. Where the internet works today, so yay. I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen, and we have some slides. Angela's clapping. Yes, that's how I feel. I was like, wow, those things you take for granted, like internet that works. All righty, get presenting this. So this is a super interesting chapter, and hopefully you can relate to it. I totally did. So with dialogues towards understanding, what we're doing is realizing that our brain, same areas of the brain are activated if we have a physical injury or an emotional injury. So the brain can cause fatigue, pain, insomnia, anxiety, and depression, all from emotional memories. So this should be kind of a review. We're going to get deeper into it. So the lessons learned early in life create pathways that are stored in the danger alarm mechanisms of the brain. So we just had some reactions as a child, and that gets stored in as danger. And usually early in life, we aren't feeling the symptoms. So sometimes people are like, well, I never got my symptoms till my 20s or 30s. That's actually really common. And the most common emotions, sorry, a little typo there, stored in emotional memory are fear, anger, guilt, shame, and sadness or grief. The fear, we're pretty familiar with this one when we have pain. Fear can cause different reactions, the fight, flight response, or freeze. If it is more the flight response, you would have symptoms like anxiety disorders, OCD, PTSD, social phobia, panic disorders. Those are more the flight response. And then the freeze response, if you tend to go that way, you'd have more symptoms of depression and or fatigue. Just gonna see if sometimes I'm able to see the chat on here. Let's see. Anyway, okay, so anger and resentment. Anger is a healthier response to being hurt than is fear. You feel more powerful. So it's interesting, between fight or flight, there is a difference. If you tend to go more into fight, it's actually a more powerful response. You actually feel like you have more influence in the situation, whereas flight is like, I should change, I should be better. It's more of a victim type of response. So a lot of children are powerless to express their anger. They might have even been taught, like, you shouldn't be angry. That's, good girls don't get mad, or things like that. So you learn to hold your anger in. And, you can think of, you could go to a playground, and if a kid starts getting angry, parents are usually like, hey, be nice, don't do that, right? So we learn to be nice and hold our anger in and repress it. So we might not even consciously feel it. We're repressing it and then, turning it to guilt or something. So when you start to begin to stand up for yourself, you can become more assertive. And that is an important part to unlearning your pain. Ooh, I can see the chat here now. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about guilt. Guilt is the feelings that many people have for the things they regret having done. You could have conscious guilt where you actually realize that you have guilt about it, or most of us with mind-body syndrome have subconscious guilt. So you could feel guilt for the anger or resentment that you have. So, I'm kind of like angry or resentful of my parents, but I shouldn't feel that way. These are in air quotes, shouldn't. And so I turn it to guilt and feel like I'm bad. But facing it can lead to the release of grief and open the door to true healing. What about shame? Shame, people who were not fully loved or accepted in their childhood, who were frequently told that they weren't good enough or smart enough or attractive enough, tend to develop shame. So shame is the belief that you're not good enough or like not a good person, you're not worthy of being loved, or that you don't deserve to be happy. So if you think of guilt and shame, it's anger turned inward. And I know that's definitely what I was dealing with. I didn't even feel like I was a very angry person, but I definitely would blame myself and feel like I was a bad person. So guilt and shame was how I expressed my anger, and it was turned towards myself. Not healthy. Sadness and grief. So you could have sadness and grief from losses. So the loss of physical presence or affection from important people in our lives. Maybe you had an actual loss, like someone passed away, or your parent was emotionally not available. And so sadness and grief do need to be experienced, expressed, and released in order to fully heal from mind-body syndrome. The other emotion we talk about here a lot is love. So when we're able to truly experience love, caring, and kindness towards ourselves and towards others, the healing can occur and the mind body symptoms melt away. I love how he says that. So many people with mind body syndrome are unable to say that they are a good person or that they love themselves. That's definitely where I was when I started this process. Um, I was raised in a really religious environment. And so I was taught a lot of things that I think I took as I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. And I always was kind of on the lookout for my faults rather than starting to feel like, oh, I'm doing a good job. Now, not everyone has that. I don't think it was necessarily that religion's fault, but that's how I interpreted it. So the exercises that we're talking about with this chapter, especially, and in this book, are designed to release suppressed anger, let go of guilt and shame, allow grief to be experienced, and then move towards a loving relationship with ourselves and others. And then the old anxieties and fear are not weighing upon you, and the normal stressors of everyday life become more easily and manageable. So I put that sentence in there because I like how he says, as we address those things from the past that cause those emotions, then we're not adding that burden to our level of stress that we already have just from day-to-day stressors. And those stressors become more manageable when we're not adding, all of that repressed emotion to it. And then those mind-body symptoms melt away. So Dr. Schubiner developed emotional awareness and expression therapy. He talks a little bit about the history of the other researched methods that led to this specific way that he has for processing emotions. And so he does say not everyone with MBS will need to engage in this type of emotional processing work. So if you think of the book The Way Out by Alan Gordon, he doesn't really get into a lot of this, expressing your anger and guilt and shame. So that works for some people. They just need to know that they're not in danger and that their body is safe, and then the brain turns off those neural circuits. But I think for a lot of people that have, symptoms that have lasted for a long time and they are not responding to just telling themselves they're safe, there's something deeper there. And we get into that in this chapter. So you might have deeply buried emotions of anger, guilt, and grief that was the source of anxiety, depression, and pain. And once you can uncover and release emotions, healing occurs very rapidly once these emotions are mobilized. So dealing with anger, he has a few case studies in there, and it's like a dialogue between him and his client. So there was one named Michael who had an alcoholic father who raged. Michael was suffering from a lot of headaches and migraines. And when Dr. Schubiner was working with him, he had him think of a time that he felt angry, not just hurt. And it was a time when Michael was 7 years old and his father humiliated him at a wedding. And so he goes through having him tell a little bit about what happened and he started feeling this sensation in his stomach, which was him repressing the anger about the situation. So Dr. Schubiner has him imagine he's that 7-year-old child now talking to his father, and what would that child need to say or to express to become powerful and free? And so he was saying things like, Father, I hate you. You have no right to do that to me. You've treated me this way too many times for too long. I'm angry. I'm mad. I won't stand for it. I deserve to be treated better. And Dr. Schubiner has people yell, right? Like get into, you're not just like, I'm so mad at you. You're like, I'm so mad at you, right? So that is part of expressing that anger that we might have learned to subconsciously repress, or there's some defenses that we'll talk about that sometimes people go into instead of anger. So here he's just really putting that guy in his situation as a child, talking to his father and expressing things that he wasn't able to as a child. And it's not like, I come from a coaching background where we kind of believe like, okay, this is more about my thoughts. I can't change the other person, but I can change how I think. And this, I just think of like, you put all that to the side, all of your like rationalizations and things, you put that to the side and you just think, what would the anger do? Or what would the anger say? Sometimes it's hard for us to cultivate that anger and say things like this. But if you just think, this is not me saying it, it's the anger saying it. What would anger do? It wouldn't be like, oh, you're trying your best. No, anger's like, hey, that's not okay. Don't treat me like this. Okay. So you want to let go of the hurt and humiliation because powerful and sorry, let go of the hurt and humiliation became powerful and expressed the inner rage that had been held in his mind and body for so many years. So he overcame the subconscious guilt about feeling anger towards his father, and he realized he didn't have that anger currently towards his father, but it was the anger that child had toward his father. So if this was something that happened to you years ago and now you have a little healthier relationship with that person, or a decent relationship, and you're like, I'm not really angry about it now, then go back to that moment as a child that you were hurt or humiliated and find the anger that's underneath that. So anger and guilt. He gives another situation of someone that it was a man whose his daughter had started misbehaving and turned to drugs and alcohol. So this is a situation later in life. It's not someone who's going back to his childhood. And that father was feeling anger towards his daughter, and then he was feeling guilt for being angry. So at one point in this dialogue, he even says, I'm so furious that I wish you were never born. And as soon as he said that, he started feeling guilt come up. And so that is a normal response. And it is also good, again, to let that anger be expressed, because that is what anger would say, not your, conscious loving mind who loves his child no matter what. But there was some anger there that he'd been repressing. So you don't actually need to tell that person how angry you are about them, which is really nice to know. And the other thing that's really cool about this process is this is your path towards a healthier relationship with these people that you love. So a lot of times people are worried about getting angry because then they think, well, then I'll just be this angry person. And then that'll really damage that relationship that I have with this person in real life. But what we find is that when anger is expressed in these healthy ways, they call it healthy aggression, that actually leads you towards a better relationship with that person, not a worse one. Because if you think about it, if you're just repressing your anger, then you have a lot of maybe resentment or guilt about yourself, and you're not fully showing up with that person how you'd want to. Feelings with loss, he goes through another example of someone whose mom died when he was a 16-year-old. And so he had some anger about it that he didn't realize. Because usually, when there's a loss, Well, not usually. Some people do feel angry about it. Other people might tend to feel guilt or sadness, which is more what he was feeling. Guilt that he didn't do more. He was sad that it happened. But by carrying those feelings of loss, resentment, guilt, and sadness, he was holding on to hurt and pain that continued to affect his body and mind. So he walks through these, there's some dialogues again, like Dr. Schubiner, and then this guy's response, how he gets to that feeling of anger that his mom died, and then forgiving himself that he felt really overwhelmed at that time, and that was all he could do. He also expressed anger at his father because his father, wasn't really showing up in ways that helped him after his mom died. Can read through that dialogue. And then what he says at the end is, may I be peaceful and contented. He has this guy repeat it. May I be peaceful and contented. May I be free from harm and illness. May I be forgiving and forgiven. And then he would repeat it to thinking of his father. May he be peaceful and contented. May he be free from harm and illness. May he be forgiving and forgiven. I'm just going to go to the chat. Angela says, the goodest in me has never allowed for healthy aggression. So these dialogues are helpful for me. I'll try these by myself. Yeah, it is. And there's the homework this week is actually to write out some of these dialogues too. So you could think it, or you could write it, or you could practice with someone. But again, we're moving through these emotions, first trying to get at any of that repressed anger. Usually that brings up guilt and shame, and then moving toward, or sadness, and then moving towards that love and compassion for ourselves. So there'll be more examples of it that we'll talk about. But yeah, I was kind of like happy that I wasn't an angry person, right? I'm like, at least I'm not dealing with anger. I don't have anger issues. But really what I was doing is just suppressing my anger and feeling really guilty and shameful. And that was kind of how I was taught to be good, but it wasn't healthy, and it was coming out in disease in my body. So defenses. Okay, these defenses are super interesting. If we have been repressing anger for a long time, we might come up with defenses that just naturally occur. So we might have fear of the anger, worry, rationalization, laughter. Sometimes you'll hear people saying really traumatic type of things, and they're laughing about it. So that's a sign that you're in a defensive mode. Minimizing or forgetting events. That's pretty common. Becoming numb, displacing anger towards others. Those are all the ways that the mind avoids strong feelings. And cognitive methods, those are like just thinking through it. Writing is what we'll talk about with the assignment this week. And then the verbal expression is with someone. Okay, this is a great comment, PJ. I thought the idea was to rewire the brain. Expressing, practicing anger seems like it would just make the anger grooves deeper rather than creating alternative pathways. That's a lot of times why we don't want to go into it, right? We're like, okay, this is a really powerful emotion that I don't want to feel anymore. So why would I go into it? But again, for the purposes of this exercise, it's like this is a little container, 10 or 15 minutes in your day, you express that anger so that it's not bubbling up and coming up in other ways the rest of the day. So it's not like you want to just turn into this angry person, but you want to have a space that you can safely express anger, and then you'll actually feel so much better because you won't be holding on to that as this is something dangerous. And then that subconsciously triggers your brain and body to have these symptoms. And yeah, Mary says it feels like the release helps in the end. Yeah. So as you'll see, it's not like we're encouraging, okay, just now start to be this angry person all the time. But for most of us, that anger is so repressed that actually letting it come up and feeling it has that therapeutic effect. And it's so counterintuitive, right? So I love how he talks about memories and memory reconsolidation, because what we know, and this, I actually watched a show, I can't remember where it was, about memories and the mind. And this is true. Memories are not only often inaccurate, but they are constantly changing. So what they were saying in the show is that you lose 50% of the details of a memory every year that goes by. So if you're like in your 40s remembering something from when you were 5, chances are your brain has kind of molded that story into something different than what actually happened. And they talk about in the book an airplane crash that happened, and maybe people heard about it on the news, but when they asked them about it, they said, yeah, I saw that. And there was actually no footage of it, but people had remembered it as if they had seen it. And that happened with 9/11 too, that in this program I was watching, people kind of mixed up what actually happened with them with some of the news stories and images that they'd seen on the news, and they kind of said, oh yeah, I saw that. I looked out the window of my school and I saw that, and it actually was like impossible they could have seen it because they were miles and miles away. um, Okay, Mary, I'm going to get to your question later. This is a good question. So since your past is merely a summation of your memory of it, and your memory is constantly changing, your past is actually also changing all the time. This is not what we were probably taught. I was taught that memories, it's just like a file in your brain, and you go to it and you pull it out, but your memories are very fluid, and your past is actually always constantly changing because of your memories of it. If you have kids, you might notice this, right? My kids will do this where they're like, do you remember that time we were here and this happened? And they've kind of put like 2 or 3 memories together, and the location is wrong and the people that were there weren't quite right. And maybe that's because I'm remembering it wrong too. That's possible, but definitely just open that awareness in your mind that memories can be changed, and we can rewrite the past. Basically, we can learn to view and experience the memories differently, which is a very cool concept. Yeah, my elderly mother did that a lot. Her timeline was all over the place. Yeah, it's kind of easier to see in other people. We're like, my memory is the accurate one, but theirs keeps changing. But really, we're all doing that. So to some degree. And we're not going back to relive it. Okay. So sometimes in therapy, they might talk about an abuse situation or traumatic situation, and we're not going back so that you're getting re-traumatized. We're doing this so that you can reframe it, so that you can have a loving compassion for yourself. So there are 2 meditations Dr. Schubiner has at unlearnyourpain.com. If you have the book, he has the password in it that you can use. And there's a time traveler meditation and revisiting the past. So this week, those are the meditations that you can focus on as you're doing this EAET. So the EAET process, just realizing that ongoing fear activates the danger alarm mechanism, which leads to more pain, anxiety, or depression. But anger leads to feeling powerful, which reduces the danger alarm mechanism and reduces symptoms. So fight or flight are different, remember. So if you have been the kind of person who went into flight or freeze or fawn, this is your chance to move through that by going into that anger, which actually reduces that danger alarm system, right? Because you're feeling more powerful now. You're not this victim. You're actually taking some of your power back. So experiencing the emotions of anger, guilt, and grief, which are typically in that order, and expressing them fully, that's how we release them. He talks about defenses. So we might go to the hurt. How do you feel about how your dad treated me? Well, it makes me feel really hurt, or it makes me feel sad. That's probably how you've been feeling about it. But for this exercise, we want to actually go to the anger, not the sadness or the hurt. That's more like, the freeze. We want to go to fight? What would the anger feel? So we might tend to minimize it. It wasn't so bad. This is just how parents treated kids at that time. My parents were trying their best. Um, Notice if you go into that. Again, it's not like this is the way you have to think. I have to be angry all the time about it. You can have mixed feelings about it. But right now, for this kind of exercise, you're putting all of those other things to the side and you're trying to cultivate that anger that you've been repressing. And if you notice yourself, or if you're doing it with a partner and they notice you going into the defenses, then we're going to try to go back to the anger. So we might also blame ourselves. That's the one I was like primarily doing, right? Is like, oh, it's probably just my fault. I'm not good enough. Oh, of course my parent was mad at me. I was a bad child, right? Like we might tend to blame ourselves. So look for that. So, I'll go to Rich's question. I'll struggle with this. We are trying to rewrite memories that may not be true or accurate. Yeah. I mean, basically we are trying to, we don't even know at this point what is true or accurate from 40 years ago, maybe, or, even if there's a situation that happened recently, our memory of it can be, just our interpretation of it. So it doesn't really matter exactly what is true or accurate if we even could possibly ever know that. It's just how we're feeling about it that affects our body. And so that's what we want to work on. So you might get symptoms as a defense. So this is an interesting one. When you start to, that anger that you've been repressing starts to come up, you might fight against it physically, subconsciously, right? So your body may tighten up with pain. You may feel anxious and upset. You might get dizzy or weak or tired. You might have trouble focusing, lose your train of thought. Those are defenses. So I've had this happen with people where they start to feel some anger and then they get so sick to their stomach. So just notice that that's your body's way of years of trying to repress that anger. And so if you can, keep working through it. If you get very overwhelmed, of course, take a break, but notice if you're like, this exercise is so hard for me. I keep losing my train of thought. I keep getting like these other physical symptoms. That's that clue to you that you're not actually going into the anger, you're starting to get into these defenses. And then acting out violently is a defense. That's not what we're going for. We're not, let's go find that person and beat them up. Obviously, that's probably not what most of us would turn to as a defense, but just realizing we're not actually trying to have any interaction with this person, probably. It's more what we're doing, with a partner or in writing to try to get these feelings to come up so we can release them. So here's the process. Step one is experiencing the emotions. So take one of the items from your list from pages 116 to 118, and those are the list of past traumatic or stressful events. So it doesn't have to be from that list necessarily, but if you've already done that list, you could look at those and pick one that you want to work on that feels like an important one for you, and just go back to that situation mentally and see what emotions arise first. You want to process the anger, guilt, and sadness, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and feel compassion for yourself. So that's kind of the framework that we'll be looking at. And then step two is allowing the anger to be expressed. So again, I like to think of it as what would the anger say? Because sometimes it's really hard for people to even feel anger towards their parent because they've repressed it for so long, or they don't really want to identify with these angry types of words or feelings. And so what would the anger say? What would the anger do? You want to, if you can, scream and yell, be forceful, speak honestly, and use swear words freely to help you experience the anger. So again, might not be what we're used to or comfortable with, but whenever Dr. Schubiner talks about it and someone's kind of quietly whispering, he'll be like, say that louder. What did you say? You're angry. Say, I'm angry, So that can be part of it. You deserve to be hangry, not hangry. That could be part of it, but no. You deserve to be angry and know that you were hurt and that you will not tolerate that. So I'll give more examples. He gives more examples of phrases you can use, because for me, it was pretty foreign. Like, what I even say? You deserve to, have those feelings that you had. You want to feel the anger, watch for those defenses, and feel what anger feels like in your body. And once you've felt that, you can release the anger with deep breaths and some of the compassion things we'll talk about. So again, it's not like we just want to get into this angry state and stay there and then just be angry all the time. But we do want to at least feel the anger about the situation that was probably repressed, feel how it feels in the body, let it come up, um, encourage it to come up, and then we can release it. So step 3 is look for guilt. So remember, this is one of the defenses. So if the anger leads to significant guilt and or sadness, the process of healing is on track. Okay, so this is usually an easier part for us. We feel that anger and then we're like, I feel so bad that I feel that towards my parent or someone I loved. So it will feel like a significant relief of emotional burden and mind-body symptoms if you allow compassion. And so usually in the form of tears and grief to soothe the guilt. So just noticing it kind of goes from anger to guilt. And then we want to move into, it might go to grief or sadness and then compassion. But here's some antidotes for guilt and shame. So see if some of these resonate with you. And again, for cultivating that anger, and then when you start to feel guilt and shame about it, you could say things to yourself like, my anger is justified. I did nothing wrong. I didn't deserve that treatment. I'm a good person, or it was not my fault. I was only doing the best I could. I was caught in a difficult situation. I was just looking for love. And most importantly, I forgive myself fully and completely. So a lot of times we've taken on the burden of someone else's actions and we think, oh, I deserved it. This was my fault. And for this exercise, you want to really put that to the side and really focus on these types of phrases in order to release that anger and guilt and shame and move towards compassion for yourself. So experiencing sadness and grief is step 4. These can arise spontaneously after releasing the anger. So in all of those examples, when someone has their anger and they express it, and then they have guilt, then they usually feel sadness and grief. The guy whose dad was abusive, he was sad that it happened that way, and he was feeling grief about it. And that's normal. That's part of it. I just wanted to be loved. You could tell yourself, I just wanted you to love me. I was lonely, sad, hurt, or ashamed. I was afraid, or I wish things could have been different. So we don't want to stay in the sadness or grief, which is sometimes where people get stuck. We want to actually move towards that love for ourselves and or letting go. So here are some suggestions for that. Listening to some of the online meditations each day that he has. Place your hand over your heart and breathe deeply. Feel your breath filling up your whole body. Breathe in kindness to yourself. Allow the feelings of kindness to fill your lungs. Visualize the kindness spreading to every cell and fiber of your body. So again, if this is hard for you to do on your own, there are those resources through the meditations or through working with someone, because if you're not used to cultivating kindness and compassion for yourself, this part of it could be really hard too. Repeat these phrases. I'm a good person. I've done the best I could. I love myself. I choose to take time for myself. I deserve to be happy, and any others that make sense to you. Repeat these wishes for yourself. This is what he said before. This is the loving kindness meditation. May I be peaceful and contented. May I be free from harm and illness. May I be loving and loved. May I be forgiving and forgiven. So those might be, something you put on a Post-it note and you repeat that over and over until it starts to feel true for you. So there may be people that you want in your life and you still want to have a relationship with them. Like, maybe it's like the man with his daughter, right? He had some anger towards his daughter, but he also wanted to have a good relationship with her. So these are the kinds of phrases. Again, this is what we just did. May they be peaceful and contented. May they be free from harm and illness. May they be loving and loved. May they be forgiving and forgiven. But then there might be some people that were abusive and, someone that, sexually abused you. You don't want them in your life anymore. And you want to still do this process and you want to feel more powerful about it. And you want to show this compassion for yourself. So I really like these. You can't hurt me anymore. I'm through with you. I won't allow you to hurt me anymore. I'll protect myself from you. Because remember, we want to decrease that danger signal. So I'll set boundaries and not allow you to cross them. Or I love myself enough to not be hurt by you again. Or I think of things like, I'll have my own back now. So just see which apply to you most and which resonate with you. You could think of your younger self. So when you're thinking of your younger self, you might find a picture of yourself at that age, and you could think of yourself as you are a good person. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't deserve to be treated that way. You will be okay. You'll get through this. You'll come out okay. I will love you. You're now safe. I'll protect you. I'll care for you. You're not alone. So sometimes I do this with people. They call it like inner child work, where you imagine your younger self and then you imagine your present day self, basically reparenting that younger self. And that's the kind of things that you might say to your younger self. So healing your younger self hurts. Your younger self's hurts also heals yours. So that allows that danger signal to turn down. So it decreases the amount of stress that we're carrying around in the present day if we can heal that younger self and make them feel validated and loved. And anytime they start to feel dangerous or danger, we're telling them, hey, I've got you now. You're going to be okay. You're safe. I'll protect you. I'll care for you. You're not alone. So here are some strategies, because again, sometimes this is hard. We're not used to doing it. We're used to guilting and shaming ourselves rather than having compassion for ourselves. So you could picture someone who you do love unconditionally, like a spouse, a parent, or child, sibling, and then imagine offering love and caring for that person. And then I've even heard of doing this with like a pet. So sometimes it's harder to have those feelings towards someone you have mixed feelings about, but maybe your dog, you have really a lot of love and caring for that animal. And then see if you could allow yourself to feel those feelings towards yourself. So imagine that person is giving you similar offerings of kindness, caring, and love. And an animal is a good one because a lot of times they are unconditionally loving, right? They just don't care what happened in the future or the past. They see you and they love you. So you could imagine having that type of love towards yourself. You could think of someone whom you hold in great esteem. So it could be like a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, someone who's a great leader or wise person, such as a religious leader, a political leader, an educator, or healer. So maybe you imagine Dr. Schubiner and what he might say to you, right? So imagine that person or entity is paying attention, listening to your situation, and what would they tell you? What advice would they give? And what words would they use? So we'll get to this. You can use this technique in that dialogue section, the writing section we'll talk about later. So it's really interesting because we might think, well, I don't know what that person would tell me. But when you get into that space of imagining, you might have your own best wisdom that comes to you through this imaginary dialogue with someone else that you respect. Okay, so there's the meditations that you'll do, and then this is the writing part. And here are the examples because there's space to do each of these exercises for many different situations from your past. Okay, so the issue in this example is physical and emotional abuse by the ex-husband. So what would the anger or resentment feel? I expressed my anger towards him and killed him in my mind. So Dr. Schubiner, like sometimes people get kind of violent in this reenactment, right? Like he was talking about some things when I did the training with him that were so descriptive and grotesque that one of the women raised their hands and said, "Hey, this could be triggering for people to hear. So just, have this trauma informed view." But, if it goes to that, just know you're not evil, you're not bad. You might want to kill someone in your mind. And that might have even been your parent. But again, this is not actually representative of what you would want to do or who you are as a person. This is just what the anger would want to do. So the guilt and shame, it was not my fault, but I feel I could have left him earlier. I forgive myself for this. And I wanted to try to keep the family together as long as I could. So again, you're just kind of coming back to that compassion about these emotions you feel. Sadness and grief. I've expressed my sadness in tears, love and letting go. I love myself. I forgive him, but I'll protect myself from him so he can't hurt me anymore. And then lessons learned. I will only enter into new relationships that are not abusive. And actions, I'll act with civility towards him, set boundaries, how often I see him and speak to him. And if he acts aggressively, I'll immediately stop the conversation and leave. So this is the part he didn't really talk about, the lessons learned and the actions, but there are spaces in the workbook each day to think about that part of it as well. So here's another example, because it's always great to go through examples. Um, then you can apply it to your situation. So the issue is my boss is controlling and micromanaging. So again, they don't all have to be from your childhood. This is one that is like an ongoing situation for this person, right? So this person has expressed the anger towards him privately and released it. I know I will not change him. So again, they've gone through that exercise of expressing anger. Weird noise. Can you mute yourselves if you're not muted? Let's see if someone's not muted. I can do that. Okay. I don't know. I don't hear it now. Whoops. Okay. So anger, resentment, you go through that process we described, feel the anger and release it. And then guilt and shame. I feel no guilt about my anger towards him. I've done nothing wrong and have no shame. So it's kind of like these examples are good to show you don't necessarily, if you're not feeling guilty about it, don't try to cultivate that. You just might be like, no, I'm justified in feeling angry about this, and I don't really feel guilt or shame about it. Sadness or grief, it's sad that I don't enjoy my work as much as I could. Love and letting go, I love myself. I let go of my dependence on his approval, and I'll protect myself from his controlling ways. So again, the anger is actually leading to a healthier relationship with this person. Lessons learned, there are many bosses like him, and I hope to get a different one soon. And actions, I will go to work each day with a positive attitude and apply for different jobs this year. So then the writing exercises for week 3, these are dialogues, imaginary dialogues that you would have with someone. When we engage in a dialogue from our heart, we can say what needs to be said and hear what we need to hear. So these could be dialogues with people you've never met, with religious leaders, political figures, or God. You could have dialogues with one or more body parts that are causing you discomfort, dialogues with your subconscious mind. Super interesting. You could have a dialogue with the inner parent part of you that's critical, or the inner child part of you that's scared. You could have a dialogue with your personality traits that you've learned, such as the worrying self, the self-critical self, or the overly conscientious or perfectionistic self. So this is where you get to be creative. These dialogues don't have to be with just your mom or dad or whatever. It can be with actual, symptoms, personality traits, subconscious parts of your mind. And that's what I have for the slides. So we have a little bit of time here. And let's just see what we have. There was one question that was in the chat, and it's like kind of a convoluted question. I actually just answered this question a little bit in my group coaching last night. Someone had a similar question. What about high blood pressure? Could it be affected by this work? I'd love to not take meds for it, and did start as my chronic pain took hold. So definitely, we know that blood pressure is affected by those survival states. When you're in fight or flight or freeze, it does affect your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing, your muscle tension, your digestion, like all of these things. So there are many people that have gotten off their blood pressure medicine with this work. Definitely, it's not my place to give you, advice on that. You want to consult with your doctor, but know that it's definitely possible to decrease your blood pressure as you decrease that repressed anger that you have, or as you learn to respond to events in your life differently without going into these survival states consciously or subconsciously. So yeah, but you also don't want to, just be like, okay, I'm just getting off all my meds, and just like you want to I think of the blood pressure medicine as maybe like training wheels. It could help support your nervous system and keep you from further complications of having high blood pressure, but at the same time it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be on it your whole life. Someone that I was coaching last night said she'd gotten off 2 of her blood pressure medications because she was on just handfuls of medications, and she's slowly been kind of feeling into which one she wanted to get off of next, and she's been able to get off of them and not have negative consequences. And then she said, thank you. Yes, I realize that I can't just go off it as it has its place right now. Yeah. So, and yeah, Ryan, geez, I'd love to reduce or remove my blood pressure medications. Yeah. So it's definitely possible. And it's possible that, you just have high blood pressure genetically, but generally, if you think of your nervous system, it's definitely directly controlling your blood pressure. And even someone that I was coaching last night was saying, like, I have high blood pressure when I go into the doctor's office and get it checked. And then once they had their doctor check at the end of the visit, and their blood pressure was lower. So that's just an indication of you being in that fight or flight response more than it is, I have this chronic condition that only needs to be managed by medication. So if you're just turning to medication, and that may decrease your high blood pressure, but you probably are still going into the fight or flight response and having other symptoms come up in your body. So keep doing this work and stay on your medication as long as it feels appropriate for you. And yeah, and both parents have high blood pressure too, right? So it might be one of those things where you're like, okay, I take this one pill, not a big deal, and all the other stuff I'm working on to decrease my pain. And, or you might be like, okay, this is, really something that I think I can manage by controlling more of my mind and my emotions. And your body is a barometer. As Dr. Schubiner said in an earlier chapter, your body is a barometer for your environment and the way you're reacting to it. Okay, Tanya, you have your hand up. What's up?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I have a question because early in one of the sessions you mentioned that you didn't have any traumatic events in your life, but you were not particularly loved or accepted in the high school. And I feel the same. And it caused me a lot of like hurt and a lot of shame when I was a teenager. But I was trying to journal about it, but I don't have any emotions. It was like 20 years ago I finished my school. I don't feel that shame. I'm not hurting. I don't have any anger towards my classmates or my teachers who caused me probably anger or some kind of childhood hurt.
Hmm.
So does it mean that this event is not causing my pain because I don't have any emotions about it? Just I found it actually silly about thinking about it. Like it was so many
Mm.
years ago. I would find it really silly to have any emotions. Like even if my classmates would thought about, oh, she's still thinking about it. Like
Yeah.
what what are your thoughts? Like, did you deal with it? So I'm trying to get to the root of my pain. What's
Yeah.
causing my pain?
Well, I think, it's definitely possible that the reason you're not having emotions about it now could be that you're over it, or could be that you've repressed it because you're like, one of those defenses is like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, right? One of those defenses we talked about is like minimizing it. It wasn't a big deal. It happened so long ago. It's not still happening. But that could be one of your clues. If that was something that was stressful at that time, then, Dr. Schubiner talks about someone who moved and got bullied. And that was really the only thing he could think about in his childhood that was stressful. And that was enough to cause mind body syndrome in later life. So it might be, how do you feel about that going into like, maybe I could cultivate some anger for those people who were teasing me at the time? Because at the time I didn't express it, but, I also didn't like being treated like that.
Yeah, I was trying to put myself in the shoes of being like 16 years old, but
Mhm.
just I don't have any emotions
Mm.
about it.
What do you think
I
about it?
was I was actually trying to be honest with
Yeah.
myself, like what can cause the pain. Maybe it's this. Maybe it's still school because I sometimes have some dreams about school, which was 20 years ago. But
Yeah.
so that's like maybe something subconsciously still I'm not
Yeah.
comfortable with how I was treated,
Yeah.
but not really like on the paper. I didn't feel anything. I was just journaling and writing how it was, but I didn't feel anything. Like I wasn't in the contact with my emotions.
Hmm.
I just didn't have any emotions about it.
Hmm. When you were younger, did you express a lot of anger towards them, or what kind of action or emotion did you take when you were being teased?
Yeah, I probably thought that way, that okay, that hurts, that's not pleasant, I don't want to feel that way, let's
Mhm.
do something else, let's like
Yeah.
listen to music, let's call a friend.
Yeah.
Or I felt like they don't deserve to be thought about, like I they don't deserve
Mhm.
for me to be thinking about it because
Yeah.
they just said something, or but they were not mean to me. I was just felt like you, like I wasn't loved or accepted. I was
Um,
just like nobody. Like I was coming to school and felt like I'm so lonely. I don't have friends.
oh, I
They're all
see.
friends with each other, but I'm
Yeah.
not with them. But they were not mean to me. I just felt like I should be better. Like I should be more sociable. I should be more easygoing. But I was very shy.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So they weren't like bullying you necessarily and calling you names,
No, no.
but they also weren't like accepting and loving and friendly towards you, or, like inviting
Yeah.
you in.
So I was
Yeah.
like sort of like was angry at myself that I'm not that sociable, that I can't really.
Mm.
I was like lacking the social skills, and I
Yeah.
was angry with myself that I can't be that outgoing person.
Okay,
Something
so
that
that's a
way.
real clue, right? That we turn our anger inwards instead of, maybe there is a reason to be a little angry, even if you can't change how they act and they didn't really, quote unquote, do anything wrong. If you're turning that anger inwards, that is a big clue that there's probably some anger there that you had towards them, but you were blaming yourself, one of the defenses. So yeah, I would definitely see if I could um, cultivate some of the anger towards them just by thinking like, if I had been able to express that anger at the time, what might I have said? Or like, what would anger say in a situation like this where people are ignoring me? And a lot of times people have this with their parents, right? It's like they were overall maybe good parents, but they just weren't emotionally available. So some of those phrases that were there, like, I deserve to be treated better. I deserve to have, acceptance. And why did you like ignore me? That's not okay. Things like that. And again, it's not like your conscious rational self is going to like understand all of this. We're mainly just trying to get that emotion of anger so that you're not turning it against yourself. Like, oh, I was the problem. Oh, I just wasn't a good enough person. Because that sounds like the guilt and the shame. And, maybe this is a instance that you could bring up some of that anger. And if it's not easily coming, maybe go to something else that's on your list. If there's anything else that you're like, okay, my parents were mainly good people, but I always felt like I wasn't good enough. And so I'm just going to try to see if there's some anger there that I can cultivate about that situation rather than turning it into my own shame and guilt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I also have a question. Like sometimes in the situation, for example, I'm working and I feel like I'm angry at my chef because she wasn't really helpful and wanted
Mhm.
me to have more responsibilities. But then I don't have time to journal or think about it because I proceed working. And when I come to that point that I want to journal about it, I don't have any emotions. Like it's gone. Like
Mhm.
I'm not angry anymore. I have thousand thoughts to think about other stuff, and it
Yeah.
just the feeling is lost. I can't cultivate it. I can't get in
Mm.
touch with it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have such a problem that they have some feelings
Yes.
and emotions, but later
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just disappear?
Yeah. It's like, I think of it as like, we've gotten so good at repressing anger at that subconscious level that it's like not even coming up to our conscious awareness. We're like, I'm not really angry. I'm hurt. I'm sad. I wish it wasn't that way. That's a clue that there is some anger underneath. And maybe in those moments that you are at work and you're feeling anger, even if you don't have a chance to journal about it in the moment, that's when you could be like, what does anger feel like in my body? Like, how am I feeling right now? My jaw is clenched, or my fists are clenched, or I feel warm, and just as you start to notice and label the anger when you do feel it, then it could be easier to cultivate when you're doing these exercises. And Angela says, yes, the feeling disappears for her too. Yeah, I like I said before, I really just was like, I'm not an angry person, and it's because I got so good at just blaming myself and repressing it that I wasn't really feeling it. And he does say, like, not everyone has to do this process. So if you feel like you're really reaching and you're like, okay, this doesn't, really feel like it resonates with me, then go with that intuition of like, okay, maybe there's not really much there. But the way you're describing it, it sounds a little more to me like you're repressing that anger and justifying, well, I was the one at fault, or I shouldn't feel this, or right? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I come to conclusion that it's all my fault. Like I should be better.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's a red flag of us turning our anger inward. Yeah. And that's so easy to do and so common, especially if we were trained to be like a good girl and not, blame other people and just take all the blame ourselves. And, I shouldn't have this anger. So it might be an emotion that you haven't practiced feeling a lot. And so your subconscious represses it. Even when you just start to feel angry, it's like, no, I'm the problem. And you go to shame and guilt. But for this exercise and these exercises this week, see how much you can cultivate that emotion of anger. And when it comes up, you can always feel it and release it. Again, it's not like our goal is to be an angry person, but it's also to not blame ourselves for things, because then our body feels like we're in danger and produces these symptoms. And Angela says, yeah, we go on autopilot and repress all the time and don't even realize we're doing it. So yeah, that sounds like what's going on from how you're describing it, where you're like, I
Yeah,
just,
but I feel like it a bit differently. I have this emotion, but I don't have time to journal about. So I'm
Mhm.
feeling that way.
Yeah, you
But
do.
when I want to address that situation, it just I don't have
Yeah.
any emotion.
Yeah. That sounds like
So is it
sense.
okay to maybe feel this emotion while it's coming
Yes.
instead of
Yeah.
trying to recultivate it?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's where I would start if I were you, is just like when you do feel it, label it, notice it, see how it feels in your body and release it then. And instead of being like, oh, I shouldn't feel this, or this is just my fault, actually leaning into that anger. And sometimes I'll do this like rage on the page exercise. Dr. Sarno used to talk about that. And it's like you just journal anything that comes to your mind that you feel angry about, or that might, again, we're just trying to actually like unrepress or release that emotion, let it come up so that we feel it. And yeah, any times that you can practice feeling anger without guilting or shaming yourself, then your body knows anger isn't a dangerous emotion. It's okay to feel all the range of emotions. And that's what we're really trying to teach ourselves is anger is not dangerous. We can express it in healthy ways. And it actually leads to a better relationship if we can express it in a healthy way than if we subconsciously repress it and feel it in our body.
Okay. Yeah.
Good
Thank you.
question. Thank you. And then there's a question, what if you have so much trauma that it seems endless to process? For example, my daughter died in difficult circumstances. So sorry for that. I'm processing for years, but I never feel decrease in the pain when I do. I understand how emotions could cause pain, but I never see a direct link in real time. Yeah, and so there's probably like um a combination of emotions and probably getting stuck in the grief and the sadness part of it. And those are totally valid, of course, to have, but will kind of keep perpetuating the symptoms. But if you're able to cultivate the anger part of it, that might be the missing piece that, a lot of times we're like, well, why would I be angry about it? It wasn't their fault. Nothing could have happened differently. Like I feel sad, I feel hurt. But cultivating the anger part of it could be that release that you're needing. But definitely he does say this isn't like a one and done process for most people. The examples he gives in the book, I think for sake of ease of understanding, are kind of like, oh, I had this really traumatic childhood and I processed this one time and then my back pain is 90% better. And that does happen with some people, but also just realizing it might be something that you work on for months with someone, and that's totally okay because of, what you went through. But we want to start seeing that these emotions are not dangerous and how to move through these emotions. And I'm guessing that if you're kind of still processing for years, it's been more of the processing of like the grief and the sadness about it. And I don't know your specific situation if you've done a lot of processing with anger, but like I said, that could be the piece we often overlook because we're like, why would I feel anger to my daughter who was this innocent victim? But maybe it's not towards her, but it's just angry, even at God or the situation or things like that. So be so gentle with yourself. That is the biggest thing to remember, is that if you're guilting or shaming yourself for the emotions that you're having, to come back to that compassion for yourself, patience for yourself, kindness towards yourself. And that's just not an easy situation. So, I won't pretend like, oh, it should just be something you get over. Um, and people are saying sorry for your loss. And Kay says, so sorry, my brother died a long time ago. Trauma and grief are the same, or sorry, trauma and grief at the same time. Left my narcissistic husband and developed back pain years later. Yeah. So yeah, it's not like always like we wrap a little bow on it and just like, oh, it's just nice and pretty and we processed all that and it's gone. But if these emotions keep coming up and haven't been processed, that's that sign that that could be what's going on with the pain in your body, which totally makes sense. And just being able to have all the range of emotions and especially go into that anger without the defensiveness could be the emotional part of it to release that people don't often talk about, in my opinion. Okay. Guys, great questions. I was kind of like thinking it might be cool to do a little demo, and also it might feel kind of vulnerable for people. So, um, if you're ever wanting to do more processing with that, if you're new to me, I offer like a $49 clarity call where if you wanted to come on that, you could just be like, I just want a one-time like experience of this with someone, so that then I kind of have a better idea of how to not go into those defenses of turning it towards myself or not feeling those feelings. And, there are a lot of people trained by Dr. Schubiner now. And so, looking for a partner or a coach or therapist or counselor could be a good way to unlock some of that if just doing the dialogues by yourself isn't as helpful in itself. But go through those meditations, go through those dialogues, writing exercises this week, and let me know how it goes. All right. Thanks, you guys. Have a great rest of your day and weekend. And next week, same time, same place. We only have 2 more chapters. Oh, no, 10, 11, and 12. We have 3 more weeks of this. And so this is, it can be kind of the hard part, the writing exercises and doing this emotional work. But if you're, like I've kind of tried all the other things, sending messages of safety that itself isn't working, then chances are you have more of that emotional processing to do, and it's worth it. It's worth all the work. All right, you guys. Thank you. Bye.